Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a 3-year ownership review of my NSX. And in this video, we're going to go over pros and cons of the car as I see it, modifications that I've done throughout the vehicle. We're going to do a street driving segment. We're going to lift up the car. We're going to do a mechanical overview of the NSX and the mods that I've done. And we're going to go over future plans. So to start off, I know this looks like a 02 to 05 NSX NA2, but it's actually a 1991 NA1. And how I ended up with this car is, I was looking for something to replace my S2000, and a friend of mine knew of this car that was for sale, hooked me up, and long story short, I ended up purchasing it on the spot once I first saw it. And it fit the bill perfectly. It's fully converted on the exterior to a 02 to 05 NSX. I'll go over those, each part of that conversion in the modifications section. The conversion is a polarizing topic. I know for the people that want it, it's worth more to the people that want it, and it's worth less to the people that don't want it, right? For me, it's something that I always wanted. I've always loved the look of the 02 to 05, so this car being a 1991, it fit my budget, and having the conversion, it was perfect for what I actually wanted. It was saving me money in the end from doing the conversion. Basically, I didn't, at the time, I couldn't afford an actual 02 to 05, so it's kind of the best of both worlds. I got the hardtop, I got the conversion, and basically everything was done for me already. So I was lucky that the previous owners not only did the conversion, the previous owners did some decent amount of maintenance. Not a lot of maintenance, as you probably know if you've seen my channel and all the maintenance that I've done to the car, but I'm thankful that there were some high dollar maintenance done. In particular, all the radiator hoses throughout the car were done. The clutch, there's an OEM clutch kit that was done 10,000 miles before my ownership. Timing belt was done 10,000 miles before my ownership. Various other odds and ends, interior things were purchased here and there. But those are kind of one of the bigger things, right? What I got into was kind of more the suspension errors and stuff like that needed upkeep and maintenance, and again, I'll go over that later. But I was thankful that there's some decent amount of stuff that was done maintenance wise to the car, and the exterior was actually in really good shape. That's a little bit of the history of this car. Now, I want to get into the pros and cons of this car, in particular my NSX. So there's tons of videos that you'll find on YouTube of pros and cons of the NSX in general. This is my ownership review, so I'm going to talk about this car in particular, the pros and cons, what pros of what was done to it, and how I see it, and the cons of what it needed, and all the negative kind of experiences that I'm having with the car. So one of the major pros of owning an NSX in general are the looks of the car and the exotic nature of the car, right? A lot of people call it a Japanese Ferrari. It sits low, the roof line's low, it's a long looking car. It's just an exotic. It has a look of a mid-engine exotic car, right? So it gets a lot of notoriety around town. You get a lot of looks, a lot of positive feedback, which everyone, as car enthusiasts, we always love positive attention, right? So that's always kind of a great experience as an owner, is to have a car that kind of not only garners a positive attention, but the car itself has kind of a legendary status, and a lot of people respect it, even though it's not some crazy 800 horsepower 1000 horsepower exotic Ferrari or Lamborghini or something like that. A lot of people know it for the part that it plays in automotive history, the all aluminum chassis, and the fact that it made Ferrari up their game, all that yada yada yada. I'm sure you've heard it before, but all of that goes into the notoriety of the car. When you drive around, people tend to respect the car, and that's a great feeling as an owner. Of course, another positive is how the car drives. I'll get into more detail in the driving segment of this video, but the car drives amazingly well. It handles really well, especially coming from an S2000, which S2000 is arguably better around the track. Most people know the S2000 is a very twitchy car. this car in comparison always has felt very planted and very stable. Probably my only gripe is the manual steering, which there are pros and cons in and of itself, right? You know, a lot of people love the manual steering for the feeling and all of that, which that's great. However, the downsides is obvious is when it's a very heavy and takes a lot of effort when you're parking and things like that. But that was only the manual steering is only in the earlier models. They did have electric power steering in later models, and there are aftermarket solutions to add power steering to the earlier models as well. So one of the other things I like about the car is how analog it is. Obviously, this is a very old car. It's over 30 years old. It's a 1991. So it doesn't have roll-up windows or anything like that, but it's very analog. There's buttons everywhere. And that's the way I like it. Whereas obviously nowadays there's touch screens and screens galore and barely any buttons or knobs. But that's just how I like it. One of my other cars is a Model Y, 2023 Model Y. I don't really love how everything is just in one touchscreen. I like how everything is here in this car is analog and within reach and very easily labeled, very easily accessible, and very easy to control. So the shifter is another really great thing about this car. This is the first car that I've owned that has a cable shifter. First mid-engine, first cable shifting car. And so I was, and again, coming from the S2000, the S2000 has one of the greatest feeling shifters of all time in my opinion. And I also had a hybrid racing shifter, aftermarket shifter in my Integra, and that felt really amazing as well. Almost liked it better than the S2000 shifter. This shifter, what I'm saying is I had kind of high expectations for the shifter, and I wasn't sure if I would like the shifter in the NSX, and I'm happy to say that the shifter in the NSX feels really, really good. Pretty on par with the S2000 and the hybrid racing shifter. So, I don't know if I haven't driven any other cars from other manufacturers with cable shifters or anything like that. So I don't know how they compare. I do know, watching other YouTube reviewer videos, that Honda is known for a lot of their shifter feel in their manual transmission cars. And so, again, I was worried that, this is not, the S2000 is a direct shifter, right? Your transmission assembly is connected directly to your transmission in the tunnel. This one, it feels really, really good, and I basically have no complaints. Next, the sound. I'll always remember when I first drove this car home, when I purchased it, the sound of the engine behind your head. It's an obvious thing, but when you've driven cars all your life with the engines in the front, it actually makes a big difference. I didn't know how much of a difference they're made, because obviously I've driven a lot of modified cars where the exhaust is loud, and that's obviously always behind your head. So I didn't know what the split difference would be with everything being behind my head now. And it actually makes a pretty big difference, and this being a V6 also is a little bit more powerful, more of an engine sound than you would get from like your four banger. That's a really cool feature to have in this car. It just reminds you all the time when you're driving it that you're driving a mid-engine sports car, and the sound of the engine and the exhaust note of this car sounds really good. Of course, that really depends on what exhaust you have. But I really like the exhaust that I have, advanced exhaust, and I just really, really love driving this thing. I actually have only, in the 3 years that I've owned this car and about 7,000 to 10,000 miles that I've put on this car, I've probably only driven with the radio on for like a half an hour total time. Besides the fact that the radio doesn't really work that great, but in general, I tend to like to drive without the radio. But like in my S2000, I just had to always have the radio on most of the time, just because the sound of the car, whether the engine and the exhaust or the mixture of the two, wasn't always like the sweetest sound. Whereas this car is just like, it's just kind of really music to my ears, as corny as that sounds. So I just drive around with this car without music on, and I'm loving it every minute of it. And the final pro that I want to get into is reliability. So obviously this is a Honda. It's a very reliable car. People have taken this NSX, the C30 and C32 engine up to 300,000 miles plus, right? Like any other Honda, any other manual transmission Honda, they're very reliable as long as you maintain them. While I have done a lot of I have done a lot of maintenance to this car, so nearly none of that was due to reliability problems, right? It was kind of either wear and tear from the car being old, or just preventative maintenance. So there's really nothing that's just broken on the car because it's poorly manufactured. So that's obviously what most Honda fans like about these cars as far as reliability. So happy to report that that also pertains to this car. So let's get into the cons. Again, these pros and cons are as I see them from my perspective as the owner of this particular car. So these pros and cons may not apply to you or to other owners. So having that said, the first con about this car is the steering, in my opinion, is the steering wheel and the seats. So obviously I have aftermarket steering wheel, aftermarket seats. The seats and the steering wheel are one thing that I carried over from my S2000, not these in particular, but I had Stradia 2s that I carry over from my S2000 because I knew that the steering wheel and the seats it's always one of the first things that I do, and I'll get into that later in the video as far as my modification philosophy. But it's one of the first things that I like to do because it's what I interface with in the car. And most old Hondas, the steering wheels are gigantic. They don't feel good. They don't look cool. And then these seats, the stock seats are leather and powered. The powered part is nice, but you sit high, the padding's super thick, and they don't really hold you. You slide around in them. So the stock seats, while the stock seats are nice for, if you want all the adjustability and the convenience of them, they're not going to hold you. They don't feel sporty at all. And so I had no qualms about tossing them. Well, they're in storage, but getting rid of them and putting in my bucket seats. Next is the front overhang is quite not super long, but it's long. It's longer than any other cars that I've had. So while this car doesn't necessarily have any less ground clearance than any of the other cars that I've had, modified cars, I have had to resort to getting an air cup kit, a Stance Cups air cup kit, just because the front end tends to, I think is because of the overhang being longer, that I need the clearance. So there's a lot of dips around my area that I've hit with my aftermarket front lip on that I didn't hit with the stock lip on, and that's annoyed me quite a bit. So that's a really big con for me. I'm not new to fiberglass parts. I've had tons of fiberglass body kits on all of my cars, and I've always been able to get around, whether it's Integra or S2000. I had my S2000s for 14 years. I've had 5 Integras ever since high school years to now, and I've never ever I've always been able to get around by just angling, whether I need to do a super angle and go almost parallel to the street, going out the driveway. I've always been able to get by with maybe just a little bit of a scrape. With this Tracy Sports lip on this car, it's almost undrivable, and I'm not even super low. I'm not even tucking tire or anything like that. So that really kind of pissed me off because I've always known about air cup kits, but I've never had to run them on any other of my cars. This car, I actually have to run it, just because it's almost undrivable. I would literally tear off the lip. Again, I'm not afraid of scraping up stuff. My Mugen bumper, my Mugen CFRP bumper on my S2000, I scraped it a lot to the point where there was even like a hole in the bottom of the corner of the bumper. and that's over how long did I have the bumper? Maybe like 5 to 7 years. And I never destroyed it going off of a dip or a driveway, right? It's just a little bit of scrape each time, and that wore over time. So this lip, I almost destroyed it the first and second time I drove with it. The first time I was like, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna learn like any other person who drives a lower car. You take that experience, you learn from it, you adjust, you change your angle, you slow down. I hit it really bad a second time in the same exact spot, and I said, you know what, this is ridiculous. I would have to slow down, and this is like a freeway off ramp coming off of the freeway onto the street. I would have to slow down to literally like 2 miles an hour just to clear it, and that's just not going to be doable. That's just going to be dangerous. So it forced me to get a cup kit, which is why I believe so many people have it on the NSX. It's something I knew coming into the car that I was going to do everything I could to not get a cup kit, because I feel like it's a crutch. I want to be able to go around, drive the car, and just kind of in a split second decide whether I need to slow down an angle to get through a bump or a dip or not, and be done. Whereas now I have to prepare, I have to make sure my tank, always make sure my tank is filled. I gotta prepare by pressing the button early, because it's fairly quick, but it's not instant. It goes it takes a good 5 seconds or so to fully air up, 4 or 5 seconds. So it's not something that you can decide in a nanosecond, right as you approach a bump or a dip. So that's a really big con for me. But that's only way around that is if you raise your car, which I'm not willing to do. I'm already not as low as I want to be. This car, has really weird. And I'll get into this in the mechanical section, but this car has a really interesting suspension setup, and control arms and knuckles and things like that, where it's really detrimental to the handling if you slam it. So the car, as I have it set right now, is basically the lowest that I want to go. Otherwise, it's just going to be really bad for handling. The other con is, again, since this car is super low and low roofline, looking out this door, I'm literally looking to the bottom third of a lot of people's doors. So, whether it's an SUV or whatever, most SUVs, I'm looking at the lower third. And trucks, pickup trucks, I'm looking at, the door sill, the door rocker panel a lot of the times. So that's a little scary. And this car being black, it's just kind of incognito. And so I really get worried that people are not going to see me and merge into me. And so that's kind of a really scary thing. So I really drive defensively when I'm in this car. Especially when I'm next to high cars or like even buses and trucks, especially. It's just that I'm really scared of not being seen, so I just have to drive defensively at all times. And I mentioned it earlier, but the manual steering is one of the cons for me. It does feel good at speed, and when you're driving it, anything above like 10 miles an hour. But when you're below anything like 10 miles an hour and lower, the manual steering is really tough. And if you have bigger wheels, it really changes it as well. So I noticed that going from my 16-inch M7s to my 17-inch TE37s it almost felt like I lost. So going to the 16s, I felt like I gained power steering, and going to the 17s, I feel like I lost power steering. It was that much of a difference. So of course this car was developed, the early models was developed with a 15-16 inch wheel stagger, and that was probably felt perfectly fine, but now by again modern age wheels, a lot of us go with 17-inch front wheels, and it's really it feels really heavy. especially when you're just trying to maneuver yourself into a parking spot or into my garage too. Another con is the technology in the car. So while I do love the analog nature of everything, it being a 30-plus-year-old car, of course, parts and electronics and everything has worn. I had to have my cluster rebuilt because the capacitors were leaking. The radio is on its way out, in and out, has a very common static sound when you twist the knob. Of course, it comes with a cassette player. The AC doesn't work that great. It has a little aspirator fan that makes noise all the time. I had to disconnect. The AC is just not plumbed really well. So I used to think that there was some kind of like blockage in my center vent, right below my clock. There's a left and right, right? And the left side when I turn on the AC, it feels like 10 degrees warmer than the right side. But it's coming from the same, it's being fed by a single tube, that both left and right sides of that vent is being fed by a single tube. It's just the way the air is being diverted inside, and there's really nothing I can do about it. So it's just kind of a poor and old design. There's vents in the door that come in through the dashboard, and those barely do anything as well. The window regulator is very common for old Hondas. All of you that will own 90s Hondas know that the windows get really slow. So I've rebuilt my window regulators, cleaned the guides and everything like that, but it's still slow. So I've purchased new window regulators. I have those in storage, ready to go for someday when I want to replace them. The ABS, I recently replaced my ABS with the 2000 and up 00 to 05 style upgrade. And just because the old ABS that came with this car is ancient, it's literally like this big. Whereas if you've seen any of the, like you're familiar with any of the old later 90s Hondas and 2000s Hondas, the ABS unit is like this big. So that's one of the things that I spent a little bit of money on to update the car with. And the final con, I would say, is the limited and discontinued parts. So not only OEM but aftermarket. So obviously the car again is 30 plus years old. OEMs technically, I think they're only required to make parts 10 years after the discontinuation of a car. So probably around 2015, Honda was only required to make parts up until then. Obviously, this being the NSX and Honda's halo car of the time, they've chosen to produce parts longer than that. But in 2023, a lot of OEM parts are being discontinued. And it's unfortunate because a lot of parts in this car are not carryover from another model. So there's not a lot of stuff that you're going to be able to buy that fits multiple cars. But a lot of the aluminum suspension is proprietary. Obviously all the interior stuff, it doesn't fit from any other car. So that's a really big issue that a lot of people are running into, is a lot of OEM parts being discontinued. And on the aftermarket front, for people like me who like to modify their cars, there's just not a lot of parts to choose from. So like in the beginning, I was looking for a brand new exhaust system from various companies, and there's not that many companies that make brand new exhaust for NSX anymore. Spoon recently came out with one again, or re-release of their NSX exhaust, but prior to that, there's pretty much like Fujitsubo, Toda, RFY, and that's most of it. And then you get other companies like SOS and Pride that are reproducing exhausts from other companies. So that's kind of a big issue, is that you're very limited on the aftermarket support. And really thankful for companies like SOS, Pride, and Mita Motorsports that are still producing new parts for this car, because it's such a limited market that there's not a lot of companies that want to produce parts for this car. All right, so getting into the modifications that I've made to the car, we'll start out with the exterior. So I mentioned that this car is a 1991 and it has the full 02 to 05 exterior conversion on it. It's one of the things that sold me is that it's actually an OEM conversion on it, meaning all OEM panels. So this is OEM front bumper, OEM hood, OEM headlights. It has OEM side skirts and door caps, as well as an OEM rear valence, lower the valence, and OEM 02 to 05 taillights, as well as the OEM sub spoiler. So it has a full OEM 02 to 05 exterior conversion. Also, it's missing, it has the OEM US reflectors shaved, or parking lights shaved off of the quarter panel and the front fender. So if you're not familiar with that, the JDM models come just like this with no parking lights on the fenders and with a side marker added to the fender. So it's a really clean look, and I'm super happy that that was done, because that's something that I always loved, but not something that I would put high on my priority list, because it requires it's pretty costly, right? It requires body work and paint. So I'm really happy with how clean the profile view of this car looks with that done. On the front end, I put an authentic FRP Tracy Sports lip. So this lip, I have an install video on this, but it's really has a perfect fitment. Just need a little bit of widening the holes here and there, but I really love the look of this lip. It's just a nice subtle look for this 02 to 05 front end. Also, I do have an SOS license plate hideaway. So this is a manual. This is not kind of automatic, electronic or anything like that. But you just twist these thumb screws and you can angle out the license plate for when you need to. So otherwise, the exterior is pretty stock. I do have a antenna, S2000 antenna conversion. And of course, I have the King Motorsports MF10s. So most of you are probably familiar with these by now, but if not, these are King Motorsports released these in 2023 this year. They are a brand new NSX spec. What that means is the old NSX spec. So Mugen used to sell MF10s by the chassis back in the day. And so the old NSX spec MF10s were 16 by 8 and 17 by 9. These are, and you know, that fit the pop-up headlight front end NSXs very nicely. But with the 02 to 05 front end, where in the US and all around the world, they came with 17 front and rear, the 16s in the front just look kind of small. So I was super happy that King Motorsports came up with these wheels. These are 17 by 8.5 in the front and 18 by 10.5 in the rear. So they look perfect on this car, and really happy that, you know, I mentioned before that there's companies like SOS, Mita, Pride making parts for this car still. Someone like Mugen and King putting together a new spec for the NSX is pretty unbelievable, considering how low production this car is. So probably the last thing on the exterior is the Type S door handle. So all door handles are the same, it's just these badges are different. So the US has a black NSX badge, the Type S has a silver badge like this, and the Type R has a NSX R logo on it. So otherwise, this exterior is very stock. I'll get into the exhaust in the next section as far as my mechanical mods. Okay, as far as mechanical mods, we'll start off with what you can see here, which is the Spoon monoblock calipers and Dixel rotors all around. So these Spoon calipers are not NSX specific, but Spoon makes the monoblock calipers based on either front mounted or rear mounted. And these are the front mounted calipers. I do have a separate video on these. So you are able to get them to work with the NSX. So it's kind of like a nice little bling mod. It is a little bit of an upgrade, because especially for NA1, because these do use 97 and up, 1997 to 2005 larger rotors. whereas the 91 has smaller rotors, and this upgrades the piston count from 2 to 4. I also have extended studs. The reason I did extended studs was to originally, because I needed a 20 mil spacer in the back for the M7s, but then for the front I just wanted the ability to use spacers if I needed to clear, brake kits in the future or anything like that. All right, so now we'll just go from front to back as far as mechanical mods. You would have seen my recent video, which is for the SOS Type R bars. So there's a front chassis bar right there in front of the radiator, and then there's another bar right there, kind of like a tie bar that sits along where the sway bar is. I do have an NSX Type R sway bar as well. And of course I mentioned the cup kit, so I have a video on this. This is a stance cup, kind of stance cup-ish kit. So the cups are stance. This is a Viair tank and compressor. And so I have a separate installation video for that. Obviously I replaced my brake master cylinder, I replaced my clutch master cylinder, all OEM. This is the 00 to 05 OEM ABS upgrade from SOS. So it's pretty much utilizes 95% OEM parts. The only aftermarket is the harness that SOS makes. I did a little bit of cleaning, of course, in the video for the ABS. I cleaned my blower unit. Suspension wise, I do have KW V3 coilovers, so this is all you can see right now. I'll show you more of that when I get the car up on jack stands. But those coilovers has been great. I paired them with SOS top hats, so that setup has been a really nice suspension and really nice handling for this car. Suspension wise, I did replace the knuckles with brand new OEM knuckles, and they come with brand new OEM ball joints. When I was chasing a steering shake for this car, I ended up replacing a ton of stuff in the front. So wheel bearings I replaced multiple times. I replaced the inner and outer tie rods. I replaced Prothane bushings in the front uprights of the car. I did the knock bushing from Australia on the right side. I have some videos for all of these mods that I've done on my channel. For most of these mods I've done in the channel. All of that to chase the steering shake. At the end of the day, that steering shake, I think the cause of it was multiple things. One of them being a wheel bearing. So make sure you buy a high quality wheel bearing. Otherwise you might have an issue with high-speed steering shake. So I did refinish the rear calipers in gold. So these are still the smaller NA1 rotors in the rear. I do have plans to upgrade my brakes, so that's why I'm not worried about that. I replaced ball joint boots, front and rear and front, as part of preventative maintenance. For the boots that did not crack, they were just old. As preventative maintenance, I replaced them just because I replaced the boots, just because if you want to replace the whole ball joint, a lot of the times you have to buy the entire control arm, which can get very expensive for this car. A lot of them are $500 or more a piece. And so I only replaced the ball joints that I had to, like the knuckle, but the other ball joints that were still good, I just replaced the boots. For the rear, I did get an NSX Type S sway bar, and I do have a advanced full titanium exhaust, and I'm just really in love with this exhaust. Here's a look at the Advance logo on the exhaust. I'm really in love with how this exhaust sounds and how the tips look angled up and slash cut. It's just my style. It's very similar to the ARC exhaust that a lot of people love. The ARC exhaust has a great look and perfect sound as well. This exhaust I think is probably a little bit louder than the ARC. But yeah, this is another discontinued exhaust that you cannot get anymore. And then I did replace These are actually, my car did come with 02 to 05 taillights and 02 to 05 rear valence, but I did purchase both of these brand new and sold off my ones that came with the car. It's super common for these taillights to separate the outer lens from the housing. These taillights are not like a lot of the other Honda taillights where the plastic is fused together. This is using like butyl glue, so kind of like what you find on headlights where you can easily bake them apart. So because of the heat in the rear, I don't know what it is exactly, whether it's the exhaust or the engine heat or just the sunlight, but these taillights tend to separate quite easily. So I purchased a brand new set, and I actually put a layer of glue around the brand new set. So we'll see how that holds up. Just to mitigate, I didn't want to, you know, just put a brand new set on and have it separate again in like a year or something like that. The rear valence I just did purchase brand new because those were, I found out, were available new still from Acura. So my old one was a little misshapen in a few areas, so I purchased a brand new one, and so the rear end's looking pretty good for now. And of course, Honda front and rear Honda emblems. This is a JDM center garnish piece. Okay, in the engine bay, this is a Type R, OEM Type R engine lid. And of course we have the gray market strut tower bar for NA1s. They do make one for NA2, which is a triangulation bar. And I have the Type S intake manifold cover, and Mugen, what I call the 1.5.2. So the reason I call it the 1.5.2 is because I believe this is the 1.5 cap, but it's the re-release, the King's Motorsports re-release, so I call it the 0.2. Also the Type R coolant cover. So that cover is just a rubberized piece cover that goes on top of the top half of the coolant reservoir, and that's only to protect the plastic from UV deterioration. Because the Type Rs have a mesh cover, OEM there's just a fully block cover. You can't see into the engine bay, so the engine bay doesn't get any sunlight. But with this, there's UV rays come in, so they created that cap in order to protect the plastic from just breaking down and deteriorating. I do have a Mugen Spec B radiator cap. I have the SOS oil pressure sending unit, a separate video on that. I replaced this guy because I was chasing a hesitation, or still am chasing a hesitation at lower RPM. So I replaced this. You can also loop this as a test to see if it fixes it. That did not fix it. So my next step is going to be to drop the fuel tank and replace the fuel pump. I do have a separate video on the SOS IAB butterfly delete. So I'm happy to report so far that the car feels perfectly fine. There's been people that came up that posted on my Instagram stating that, you know, the car is going to feel like crap. You're going to lose a lot of low end torque. That's been proven over the years that doesn't work. Well, the car feels perfectly fine, and that's what other people have reported as well with SOS kits. So I know I'm not alone in that. I know I'm not making it up. So really happy about that. If you want to know more about that, check out that video. This is an authentic Mugen intake. So this is super rare. It comes with a velocity stack that sits in the fender. Big shout out to my buddy Harry for allowing me to purchase that off him. He's the king of finding rare parts, so he jumped on that, and you know, he has bigger plans for his engine, so he allowed me to purchase that off of him. Also, you can't see it, but I just got my car back from 6 months being down, because I was waiting for the JDM 5-speed to get done. So I did the JDM gearing for the transmission, which replaces, I believe, the second, third, and fourth gears, the shorter gears, and I also did the optional 4.23 Type R final drive. So the car has a lot more. The car is just geared really well now. It used to be that second gear will take you up to like 80, 81 miles per hour, which may be good for the track, but it's not fun for driving around town because you just basically stay in first, second gear. And even on the freeway, I think I'd be in like third and fourth gear, just cruising, just because I wanted power. So the final drive is not for everyone in that, you know, some people don't like to rev high, but I like to have power on tap all the time. I don't care about gas mileage. This is my fun car. So I'm really happy with the whole transmission setup. Also in the engine bay, I replaced the clutch slave cylinder, brand new. I replaced, you know, throwout bearing, everything. The clutch was still new, so I actually reused that. It was only like 10,000 miles old, but I did, when the transmission was out, I replaced, you know, throwout bearing, the throwout bearing or release bearing guide, and things like that. I did also replace the OEM, replaced the oil pan with a brand new OEM unit when I first got the car, because when I first got the car, I had 2 oil leaks. It was one, it was leaking from the factory oil pressure sending unit, which is super common. And then 2, it was leaking from the oil drain bolt. I did my first oil change and there was Honda Bond on the oil drain bolt, which really made me shake my head because, you know, that was obviously the previous person who worked on this car knew about it. And then they just didn't want to replace the oil pan probably because it has aftermarket headers on this, has DC headers, which you have to take off the front header in order to get access to the oil pan. So I ended up putting a brand new OEM oil pan on it early on when I got the car and fixed that oil leak, and I got the SOS oil pressure sending unit to fix the second leak. So now there's no oil leaks. So as I mentioned, there's DC headers in this, so which is not a super exotic JDM or anything like that, but what's important is that it comes with this carb EO number. So I'm really happy about that. So, you know, just really easy to pass smog with headers that are street legal. Also in the engine bay, I have the Davis Design Fab coil block. So I have a separate video on this, but this is meant to keep water from here when it rains or when you wash your car getting on the rear coils. So that's a big issue as far as getting rust on the coils. And maintenance wise, of course, I've done coil packs, I've done spark plugs. The only other thing that I need to do in the future is timing belt and the lost motion assemblies. I do have a slight tick when it's cold that goes away due to the LMAs being sticky. Okay, getting into the interior. First is I replaced the OEM gathered leather with these black Alcantara door inserts. So I have a separate video on how to DIY that yourself, but if you don't want to DIY that, I do sell that as a service, but you have to send me your 5 pieces per door cards, and I will have to tear off your leather, so there's no going back. I can send you back your leather, but you're gonna have to, you know, tear off this and re-glue it back to your OEM pieces, because the aluminum or the stamped steel pieces that are behind these are discontinued, and so you're not going to be able to, you know, you have to find a separate set if you don't want to destroy your OEM pieces. But I do offer that. Hit me up on Instagram if you're interested in that. I also replaced my door handles. These are SOS billet pieces, door handles, because those are pretty common for the hinge mechanism to break, which mine did. I have Brid Stradia 3 King editions. So this is a special edition for the Stradia 3 King edition. This is based off of Drift King Keiichi Tsuchiya as a special colorway. So it's a full red. I used to have the non-special edition Stradia 3s, which had a faux carbon stripe right here and right here, which I wasn't a real big fan of. So I really like this full red. It does have green stitching, which, you know, green is Tsuchiya's color, but it's kind of hard to notice. So that's, you know, it doesn't really bother me that it's kind of doesn't match anything else in the interior. And these are carbon editions, so they're carbon backed, and I'm using Brid LR rails, which are specific to the Stradia seats and sit the seat nice and low. I also have ASM Ruby floor mats, ASM Caro floor mats. So big shout out to Tommy at Go Tuning for these floor mats. He set these up for me for ASM to produce these. Previously, Carl made these black floor mats, but not from ASM. So these are the ASM Ruby Edition, come in all black with red stitching and the special ASM badge. I also have Mugen pedals and a Renegade dead pedal. I have recent videos on those. I have a spoon steering wheel. So this is actually a spoon steering wheel. Doesn't say spoon anywhere on it except for where Ichishima signed it for me. But that's because I replaced the horn button with an OEM Type S horn button. And this has the flush mod on it. So this meaning it's flush right here as opposed to sticking out. If you Google a picture of this, the button will be kind of 3D dimensional and stick out, which I'm not a fan of. This modification is the first video I ever made for my YouTube channel. So if you want to check that out, go back and see that video. I also mounted the steering wheel up utilizing Works Bell setup. So this is a Works Bell quick release and short hub, which I highly recommend over the OEM Momo setup because this allows you to utilize your SRS reel. So it's super easy install, no cutting, it's really quick compared to the Momo install. I have install for the Works Bell and the Momo on my channel, and the Works Bell cuts out probably like 2 hours worth of work as compared to the Momo setup. And this allows you a really nice, easy way to utilize the OEM SRS reel. Further in the interior, I had this center console refinished, and I purchased a brand new badge. These badges are available from Honda, or you can get them on eBay pretty cheap. I refinished my center console. If you're not familiar with NSX, these center console and the switch panels have a metallic film that peels and bubbles, so it's a real pain to refinish these. You gotta peel it completely off, and it does not come off in one nice piece. It comes off in a million pieces. So I refinished this piece. I have a Type R shift boot, has a carbon garnish on it. This is a Mita Motorsports shift knob, countersunk on a Type S shifter. So this is a Type S shifter, and this is a Mita Motorsports countersunk knob. I do also have an OEM Type S knob, but Mita sent me this to test out, and I really like it. It's I used to think that knob is an exact copy of the Type S knob, but it's not, because it's countersunk. The OEM Type S knob is not countersunk. So on this shifter, it sits about maybe like a 1/4 inch lower than the Type S knob, so it has a really nice feeling. It's not as heavy though, so that's the only downside. I do have an SOS e-brake button also, so that used to be like a chrome finish that was all peeling and flaking. My switch panels for my cup kit, and a Panavise mount with a Peak Design mobile phone magnetic charger. I also have a Zoom Engineering Penta mirror in carbon fiber. That's just an OEM replacement mirror, and really easy to install. It's called Penta because it's 5-sided shape. It has a blue convex glass on it. Really like that mirror, nice clean OEM replacement look. And last but not least, I have Blackview 2-channel dash cam. So this is 2-channel because there's a front camera and there's a rear camera. That's really easy to install too, and really important to have for safety reasons. Alright, we're back in the garage, everyone, for the mechanical section of the review. And so I'm just going to go over a bit of interesting tidbits about the car, a little bit of information about working on it and that sort of thing. So starting in the front suspension, if you never owned an NSX or worked on an NSX, it has quite a bit of a different suspension setup. You can see here the normal double wishbone suspension, double A-arm control arms, but there's this kind of compliance pivoting system here in the front, which I believe is for, like I said, compliance, to make a little bit more of a compliant ride. So you'll notice that I mentioned before how I replaced ball joint boots as a preventative measure because these ball joints, there's a ball joint in the front of each of these control arms. If you want to replace those, you got to replace the entire control arm, and those control arms are not cheap. So I replaced those boots as preventative measure, to you know, in case if one of those tears and gets a bunch of junk in them, then I'll end up making me replace the ball joint boot, the actual ball joint, and that's not going to be fun. So that's what I did as a part of maintenance. But yeah, this is a completely different system. You know, you're not used to seeing ball joints in the front of control arms like that in other 90s Hondas. So this being a compliance pivot piece, the aftermarket, they do make a compliance clamp which bolts to these pieces and clamps around this piece and holds it in place, and kind of I think it's supposed to just create a stiffer feeling, and not something that I haven't done that yet, because it's not something that I want to do. When I was originally searching for the cause of my steering shake, that's kind of the opposite of what I wanted to do. So I didn't want to create a more sensitive steering feel in the car. So now that I fixed that part, I may look into getting the compliance clamps. You can see the sway bar connection, Type R sway bar. That's a usual, nothing unusual there. You have an air guide for the brake calipers. There is an interesting little setup for this piece right there. That is what some people call the upright. So that's the piece that I replaced the bushings in when I was looking for my steering shake, because some of the bushings were a little cracked. So I replaced those with polyurethane bushings. So again, that's a little bit different. You know, typically the control arms connect to the chassis, whereas the control arms connect to this actually connect to this upright. So this upright is bolted to the chassis, the control arms bolt to the upright. Another thing about the NSX is if you have a suspension system like these KWV3s where the height is not adjustable independent of the preload, you're going to run into the issue where if you run the coilovers low, you know, if you want to run these coilovers low, right, you have to basically lower this perch. And it's not showing it here because I only have one side of the car jacked up. If I had jacked up both sides of the car, this arm would make contact with the bottom of this perch, which is not ideal. You'll see a lot of people, new people to the chassis, when they jack up the car, this will be jammed against the arm and they'll be like, oh, I can't lower the car anymore because this perch is hitting. What you have to do is jack up the suspension. So what it does is it lifts up the actual shock, because the shock is mounted to the bottom of the control arm. You're jacking it up. The shock this whole assembly is raising, and it creates this kind of gap right here, and then that's when you can turn the perch. But when it's at full droop, and again when the other arm is at full droop, this whole thing goes down. And when the arm is pitched like this and the coilover is extended more, these two pieces just make contact and you basically can't do anything with the perch. So that's kind of a big downside to this car. Coilovers like this are not meant to be run this low, and already it's hard to see since I have a cup kit here, but there's not that much shock travel either. And the last thing I wanted to note on the front suspension, as you can see here, I put brand new knuckles in with brand new OEM ball joints. Here's my old knuckle. So it has to do with roll center. So because this knuckle is so weird in that the two ball joints facing towards each other, it's not easy to correct roll center on this car. So if you're familiar with other cars, most of the ball joints point in the same direction, downwards. And then a roll center adjuster will be like an extended ball joint, which will kind of reposition one of the control arms, usually, you know, the lower upper control arm, and kind of correct the angle. So when you're lowered, the angle is not so drastically pointed upwards. You know, so like when your car's lowered, the control arms go like this. So both control arms are parallel, and the roll center is like below the ground. So The roll center adjuster tends to correct the lower control arm to put it more level with the ground as you're on the ground. But that's not possible with these, because if you were to create the control arms both bolt to the inside, obviously, of the knuckle ball joints. So there's no way to create like an extended ball joint to correct the control arms. The only way to do that would be to make a custom knuckle and extend the length of this knuckle in order to correct the angle of the control arms and correct a roll center. So that's another downside to the NSX. Again, these are kind of very special suspension pieces. And I did purchase a brand new set of knuckles because these are one of the items that, I wanted to make sure that I purchased brand new from Honda while they're still available, right? I don't see this piece being produced in the aftermarket anytime soon. There's companies like Hard Race that are producing replacement arms for like Civics and Integras, but I don't necessarily see them producing the NSX knuckles or control arms anytime soon. And of course, in terms of replacing wheel bearings, it's really easy just to unbolt these 4 bolts holding in the wheel bearing assembly. It's the same for the rear of the car. I have separate videos on those, but that's always a positive thing as far as maintenance goes. Now we're towards the rear of the car, and mechanically speaking, as far as the engine and the transmission, they're very similar to like a big B series or K series engine as far as ease of working on it. The only difference, or biggest difference, I guess, is that it's mid-mounted, so it's kind of harder to get to certain things. But otherwise, it's it's a transversely mounted engine, so they have a transaxle, which is similar to a front-wheel drive transmission. So a lot of similarities there. The biggest differences are, of course, suspension related, things like that. Exhaust is super easy to swap out. Sway bar has great access. Probably the biggest positive of the NSX is, of course, what it's known for is the aluminum chassis. So you don't run into a lot of seized bolts or rust or anything like that. This car being 30 plus years old. This car in particular was a California car, so even less of an issue there. But there's a lot of specially coated bolts. You'll see a greenish tint on some of the hardware and aluminum pieces, and that is I haven't personally run into any seized bolts or hardware on this car in particular, which is really awesome for a 30 plus year old car. And again, in the rear knuckle is more traditional than the front, where both ball joints are pointed downwards. But the control arms, the knuckles, those are all, of course, unique to this vehicle. So those are other things that you're going to have to be careful about as far as longevity of this car, right? Again, I replaced all these ball joint boots, the ones that were not torn, in order to, as preventive measure, in order to get around from purchasing a brand new control arm, because this car only has 125,000 miles on it. These ball joints, of course I checked them for play first, but if there was no play, of course it's not that much miles for a Honda. So if you are watching this video in the future and you have a 250-300,000 plus mile NSX, these control arms, I don't know if they're going to be available for you, but that's something that you will have to consider when purchasing an NSX, is whether there's this kind of maintenance, might need a full control arm, or hopefully there's more options for ball joint replacement in the future. And as far as other miscellaneous mechanical things about the car that are interesting, the bumpers on this car, and if you in my video for the SOS chassis bars, you'll see that in order to remove the front bumper, you have to remove it with the crash beam, which is kind of not ideal, right? Because it's heavy and it's cumbersome, and especially when removing the bumper and putting it on, you can kind of ding up you have more chance of dinging up your headlights, your fenders, just because it's more cumbersome to handle. The rear bumper is the same. You can do it both ways for the rear bumper. However, if you wanted to remove the bumper independent of the crash beam, you'd have to remove the taillights first, because there's bolts holding the rear bumper cover to the crash beam. So in order to access those bolts, you have to remove the taillights. And if you don't want to remove the taillights, you can remove the bumper just unbolting the beam on the inside and a few other bolts in the fender wells, and remove the whole bumper with the beam, just like the front end. But so there's pros and cons of both, right? Like, you might say that the removing the taillights might be easier, so you can just remove the bumper cover independent of the crash beam. But if you're familiar with Honda taillights, especially those from the 90s, they're not built the best. It's just studs and plastic, right? So a lot of people strip out the stud from the plastic on cranking them too hard. There's a foam gasket that has a lot of give, right? So a lot of people torque on it too much. And there's a ton of studs, right? These are long taillights. A ton of studs all along there. And it's really kind of a pain to get all of them tightened down evenly, and you don't want to break a stud. And these taillights in particular are not designed particularly well, where this shape right here, there's studs like along this bottom half. There's no studs in like this top triangle area. So what happens is, you'll see here a little bit, is that it's kind of hard to see, but this top portion of the taillight sticks out just a little bit more than the bottom, because you're cranking on the studs on the bottom half and relying on those to pull in the top part. If you have like a brand new thick gasket, especially, it makes it tougher. And you don't want to just crank on these hard until this evens up, because, well, again, it's going to be uneven, right? Because the bottom part is the part that's being secured. But you don't want to crank on it and then break a stud or anything like that. So it's kind of like, me personally, I don't like to touch the taillights. Once I have them on, I want to leave it there. And so for me, remove the bumper, I usually just remove it with the crash beam. But that's just another thing where it's like, no other Honda that I've owned, you have to take off the crash beam with the bumpers. It's a real, especially the rear bumper for the early cars, it's a steel crash beam, I think, whereas later cars it's aluminum. So it's pretty heavy for this car. For my original bumper, when I first took it off, I cracked the paint when I was laying it down, because the steel crash beam was so heavy, and I wasn't considering that. And then a random tidbit, one of the things I really enjoy about Hondas is their pinch welds, right? They always make it really easy to work on your car. So you can see here that there's a pinch weld under each jack stand, and there's actually a pinch weld right in the middle. It's a jack point, specifically a jack point. So you can jack up from the middle and put two jack stands, just like I did. Not a lot of companies think about that kind of stuff for some reason. Like, I've worked on Nissans and Lexuses, Toyotas, and they have these really thin pinch welds that are not, that, you know, basically bend and just crease under the weight of the car, are not really meant for a floor jack. They're meant for like the stock scissor jacks. And it's like, why, you know, just create something. Every Honda that I've owned has really substantial pinch welds that never really fail under a jack stand or a jet floor jack. So that didn't change for back in 91 for this car. Honda made it nice and easy for you to jack this car up and work on it. And a note about working on the engine. So because it is a mid-engine vehicle, there are things that are not so easy to get to. And the engine is famously tilted a little bit. So you can see that the front bank is easier to get to than the rear bank. So like, one of the things that I want to do, or that I have, is upgraded LMAs. And technically you can do that with the engine in the car. However, I'm not looking forward to doing that kind of thing. Leaning over the side of the car hurts my back, and accessing the rear as far as like removing the camshafts and everything like that in order to get to the LMAs is not something that I'm looking forward to. So I might just pay someone to do that and have them do the timing belt at the same time, because while it is possible to do the timing belt in the car, it's quite difficult from what I understand, just because of the limited clearance that you have in this area. So a lot of shops tend to do engine out service for the NSX, which includes timing belt, water pump, all of that. And then you might as well just tackle anything under the heads. So, again, while I don't have the ability to get my car high enough in my garage, because I don't have a lift of any sort to get the engine out, I might take my car to a shop to have them do the LMAs and the timing belt and water pump in the future. Other than that, it's quite easy. I changed the starter easily. You can change the alternator quite easily. It's right here. Injectors, spark plugs, coil packs, those are all easily accessible. So bleeding the coolant system is one thing that's usually difficult for mid-engine cars, but that's one of those things where if you have the right tools, it'll probably help you out. So I have a vacuum bleeding system that I can use, so I'm probably going to use that and see how it works when I change out my radiator in the future. And of course, I touched on that earlier, but the fuel pump for some reason in this car is not accessible without taking out the fuel tank. So while there is some access to behind the seats, you don't have access to remove the entire fuel pump. You can only disconnect it there, and you have to drop the entire fuel tank in order to pull out the fuel pump. So that's another downside to this car. So overall, I really actually enjoy working on this car. It's fairly easy. You just gotta watch out for, with the aluminum suspension arms and everything like that, there's pros and cons. It'll be harder for you to find like a seized bolt or anything like that, but at the same time, it'll be easier for you to cross thread something and to strip something out. So that's one of the things you have to look out for. But otherwise, it's besides, the unique suspension setups and anything like that you may not be used to working on or looking at, it is a Honda and it's fairly easy to work on.
All right, and welcome to the driving portion of this video, everyone. So what else is there to say about the NSX that you don't know? I can talk about the visibility, which everyone in every review talks about, the fighter pilot visibility. It's all true. You can see probably from the rear camera that my visibility is really great. The A-pillars are really small. But in general, you know, I mentioned how low the car is. Just the car just feels really refined. It's a really smooth drive, and of course the sound from behind your head. So guys, I'm not a car reviewer. I apologize for the lack of vocabulary in this video. My driving experience is mostly with the Integra and the S2000. Again, I've had the Integra for many years over the decades at some point or another. And I've had my S2000 for 14 years before I sold it. So I'll be comparing it a lot to those vehicles. And one of the things I first noticed from coming from the S2000 is how stable this car is. You might hear that too, how stable this car is at high speed. Not only at high speed in my opinion, but on turns. You know, most people know that the S2000 is a very sharp vehicle. It's very tail happy. You know, famously the AP2 S2000 got a lot softer just because the AP1 was found to be, you know, really oversteery and stiff. So in general though, AP1 and AP2, you know, those cars were very tail happy to begin with. So in comparison, the NSX is very stable. I feel like driving the S2000 with how oversteery it is and how twitchy it is, it really makes you a better driver. Not to say that I'm an amazing driver, but this car feels so easy in comparison to drive. I don't want to jinx it. You know, I still haven't taken this car to the track or anything like that. But it feels so stable, so smooth, it's so controlled even on sharp turns that it feels like very different in that way from the S2000, in a good way. So the manual steering is really great when you're driving, of course. Obviously, the biggest issues I had with manual steering is when you're going slow speed and you're parking at speed, you're perfectly fine. It communicates everything on the road to you. And the suspension system on this car feels really good. Once again, it's KW V3s, and I'm on a 17-18 inch setup with a 215 and 275 tire, RT660. Everything feels really good. Coming from the S2000, I was used to a more stiff suspension setup with the Tane. A lot of people know that Japanese suspension tend to be a lot stiffer, come with a lot more higher spring rates, or tuned for a lot higher spring rates. The KW in comparison is a lot softer, but I've always really liked, I had KW V3s on one of my last other Integras, and I've always really liked how they felt. It's a lot more of a smoother ride, which I didn't mind for this car because I knew I'd be cruising more in this car than driving aggressively. So it's a nice balance of comfort, but still aggressiveness, and able to take you around the corners. The JDM 5-speed is really good. If you're not familiar with the gearing for NSXs and US gearing in particular, second gear takes you up to, for US spec gearing, second gear takes you up to 81 miles per hour. Let's test out what second gear and JDM gearing takes you up to. About 63, 64 miles per hour. So quite a big difference. And that makes all the difference, especially when you're driving around town. Like if you're just going to local Cars and Coffee and not hitting the freeway or something, or taking the back roads, a road like this, I could be in second gear the whole time. With the JDM gearing on the freeways, I'd often find myself at like 80 miles per hour cruising, 75, 80 miles per hour, cruising in like fourth gear, no problem. And if I needed the power, I downshift to third gear. With the JDM gearing, plus I have the final drive, the Type R final drive, it makes spirited driving so much more fun. You're shifting a lot more, and that's what you want to do in a manual transmission car. Everyone knows this car isn't very fast. You're not buying this car for lap times or for 0-60 times, I mean quarter mile times. You're buying this car to roll through the gears and have a great driving experience. Now as far as my mods go in respect to driving, again, my preference is the spoon steering wheel, which is based off of a Momo Monte Carlo. I really love how the thumb rests are at 3 and 9. I have a Mugen 3 steering wheel also, and if you're familiar with it, it's a little bit, the thumbs are a little bit maybe at like closer to 4 and 8. I'm not a fan of that because it kind of, for me, it makes me have my elbows kind of in my ribs. So the 3 and 9 position of the Momo Monte Carlo, or or the spoon steering wheel I should say in this case, is really my preference, and along with the thickness of the steering wheel and the diameter of the steering wheel. So all of that, of course, is driver preference. I always tell people when they ask me about steering wheels, you really just need to grip the steering wheel and test it out, because there's so much that goes into it, into your choice. In my opinion, it's very subjective. So that's my taste. That's why I stick with the spoon steering wheel. This seat is, again, my favorite seat. It holds you. The positioning is always really low in whatever car you put it in. It has this low max positioning, which is, Brid's way of saying that it's basically the lowest they could get the seat possible. And it just holds you. It just holds you. It feels, if you stand in this seat with your eyes closed, you would think it's a bucket seat. However, you don't have the downsides of any of the bucket seat issues you have with the seatbelt. So my stock seatbelt works perfectly fine. It's perfectly safe. It goes across me at all the correct places. And the seat is not too tight either. A lot of S2000 people like to go with Recaro RSG, which is an amazing seat, but it's a little too narrow for me. This Stradia goes up to probably 36, maybe max of 38. Probably on a 38 waist, it would feel like an RSG on me. Another thing I want to talk about is the SOS IAB deletes. So deleting the butterflies. There were some people that told me, SOS just came out with this kit, with a delete kit in 2023, late 2023. And people told me, hey, it's been done before. People have tried to delete the valves, the butterfly valves, and it's resulted in a terrible loss of low-end torque and power, and it just makes the car feel really crappy. I'm happy to report, as others have reported since the SOS kit came out, that the car feels perfectly normal. Granted, I did do the JDM 5-speed gearing at the same time, so that probably helps lower end acceleration. However, I feel absolutely zero loss in power or torque in the low end. And I mentioned the sound. Engine note, it's all perfection as far as a Honda nerd goes. I say that as a caveat because, as I mentioned before, obviously this is not like a flat 6-cylinder like a GT3 or a V10 or a V8 even. It's just a normal V6, very similar to what you find in like an Accord or something like that. Famously this car is known for, right? Just a Honda V6 with VTEC. But if you're coming from any other Honda, it sounds amazing.
think I mentioned before also, prior to me installing the SOS Type R front braces and the Type R front sway bar, I didn't feel like the car was too oversteery. And in thinking about that, I don't know if it's because I'm used to the S2000, again, where it's oversteery, or it's more probably because I haven't taken this car really to the limits. I have taken it around some turns pretty fast, and you know, in comparison to the S2000, obviously I've taken the same turns as S2000, and it feels a little, you know, a lot more twitchy. So, you know, I know it's not too much about taking it to the limit, but still, I didn't feel like this car was too crazy oversteery, which some people feel it is. From even when I had just upgraded the rear sway bar. So at one point, I had the Type S rear sway bar, stock front sway bar, and no front chassis bars. So now with both rear sway bars, front and rear sway bar matching, and the front chassis bar, you know, it should be more understeery. Neutral, I guess. Some people obviously prefer an oversteery setup, but again, I'm not taking my car to the track too often or anything like that, and I don't mind. And you know, obviously, I'm used to front-wheel drive cars. I've driven those kind of cars for a really long time, so I don't mind an understeery setup at all. I would say one of the only other downsides to the manual steering when you're driving, and the reason why some people have developed a quick steering rack with quaife for this car, is that the steering is kind of slow. So when you're taking a sharp turn, like on a mountain pass or something like this that I'm on, you find yourself kind of like fully locked, you know, at 6 and 12 quite easily. Let's see how far this is a 90-degree turn. Yep, and look, I'm way past. I had to go almost 360. The bucket seats, I highly recommend giving them a try at least. There's nothing like taking a turn and not having to brace yourself, not having to brace your leg against the door panel. You can focus on the driving, and that's the most important part. Bucket seat, or one of these reclining bridge seats, is one of my favorite mods to put in any car to start out with. The brakes on this car feel really good too. I'm just on some Spoon monoblock calipers and StopTech Sport pads, but especially after the ABS upgrade, the brakes feel really, really confidence inspiring. Without the ABS upgrade, anytime I'd go over some kind of bumps and brake, it will slightly lock up, and that was when my ABS obviously wasn't working, but it just wasn't a great feeling. I've tracked my Integra on no ABS, and that's just tracked and daily driven my Integra with no ABS, and that's just not a good time. Just a really fun time to drive. Everything feels really good. Brakes, steering, acceleration, sound, noise, right? It hits all of your senses and just puts a smile on your face. All right, next I just kind of wanted to touch on my build philosophy and my future plans. So the reason why those are kind of related is because my build philosophy has to do with why the car is the way it is right now, and why I've gone through so much headache of maintaining the car and fixing it up the way it is. So my build philosophy is basically to get the car up to mechanical spec that I deem worthy. Meaning I want to fix any kind of major problems with it, just like the oil leaks that came with the car and things like that. I want to upgrade any kind of drivability or safety issues, just like fixing the ABS that I did. I kind of want to just get it up to the point where I don't have to worry about day in and day out of mechanical issues or things that might arise from any kind of issues with the car. That is why I focus on fixing any kind of oil leaks, upgrading parts while they're still available, purchasing parts like I have window regulators on hand just in case these window regulators go out and are discontinued, things like that. That's why I focused on replacing ball joints and boots, because I want to make sure that I purchase all of those parts while they're still available. I have a whole box full of OEM parts and rubber seals and gaskets for future proofing my ownership with the car, basically. And so I like to get those things done first before I work on what I call the fun stuff, right? Fun stuff being like aesthetics, stuff that's not necessary, right? Wheels, turbocharging, supercharging, body kits, things like that. Well, obviously I've done some of that stuff. It's because the reason being is because I had to balance I had to balance like a little bit of responsibility with having fun, or balance my sanity with maintaining the car. I'm on year 3. If I had waited 3 years to this point now where the car is good, in order to start putting wheels and suspension and exhaust and fun stuff on the car, then I probably would have gone insane and sold the car by now. So there is that balance, right? I would probably put the split at like spending 50 to 75% of my time and money on maintaining it and working on the not so fun stuff, and then saving 25 to 50% of my money and time for the fun stuff. Whereas, if I didn't care about any of the maintenance and stuff, like I said, the car looked really good when I first got it, but it had some stuff. While that stuff wasn't hugely detrimental to the car, the problems weren't hugely detrimental to the car, and I could have just spent all that money on putting a wide body kit on it, turbocharging it, and making it look cool on the outside. It would have really hit me inside knowing the condition it was like under the exterior. So there is that balance, in my opinion, for my build, of responsibility and having fun with the car. So I was able to, I think, get the car by year 3 to this point of balancing the two, and I'm really thankful for it. So now that the car, I still do have some responsibilities, some maintenance that I still need to do. That's not a huge problem, and not something that's going to eat away at me while I sleep. So from here on out, I'm going to hopefully be able to dedicate more of my time to more of the fun stuff. So that's why there's a hood back there. I'm testing out a hood soon. I'm going to start looking into some more aesthetic stuff. And then go from there. So as far as future plans, my responsibilities consist of replacing my fuel pump soon, and replacing, I do still have to do my lost motion assemblies. So that will be in the future. I think I spoke about that earlier in the video, unless I cut it out. But whenever I have to drop the engine for like timing belt, I'll just go ahead and do the LMAs. But those are pretty much the only two big responsibilities left on the car. So that leaves the fun stuff, right? So what else do I have to do? I have plans to, like I said, do a hood of some sort and do a wing, and a big brake kit is coming. So those are the immediate plans. In the long-term future, maybe there'll be like a paint job. This paint is not in the greatest condition, although it's very passable. It looks very decent. It just needs a polish to get all the scratches and like scratching out. But other than that, I don't see myself due to the cost of like supercharging and turbocharging, I don't see myself doing that anytime in the near future. But like I said, we're getting into the fun part of the ownership. So this is where you get to kind of do for me at least, do my fine tweaking here and there. You know, this is where I'm going to start really refining the car and upgrading certain parts here and there that I've always wanted to upgrade on my interior. That's one of the things that I tend to always do last, besides the seats and steering wheel. But like I want to do the headliner, so convert that all to either NSX R spec or just do a black Alcantara headliner and pillars. But we're just gonna start getting into that type of thing. You know, I would love to start purchasing like the Euro boutique, carbon fiber trim all around. Those kind of things are what I call the fun stuff that I end up pushing down the line for me, just because I have more important responsibilities to purchase for the car prior to that. So we're gonna start getting into that in the future on this channel. We're still gonna do DIYs and stuff. It'll just be hopefully fewer and more spread out as far as DIY maintenance. I'll hopefully have a DIY, you know, on brake kit and any of the fun stuff that I do. But I'm gonna start trying to, you know, film more driving videos now, going into the canyons or wherever, driving to meets, filming other NSXs at meets and things like that. So look out for those videos in the future. So what are my concluding thoughts? If you would have asked me how I felt about this car in year 1 and year 2, it would have been completely different. Like I said, I was chasing that steering shake issue, and so it had me really contemplating whether I had made the right decision or not. Selling my S2000, which was essentially perfect. You know, I had owned that car since it was basically brand new, 9,000 miles only on the clock, bone stock, and I maintained that car its entire life, all the way up to when I sold it with like 125,000 miles or something. So that car was mechanically perfect, had no issues with it. You know, it was still new. The power windows still, you know, went up at full speed. AC was ice cold. You know, it still had essentially no issues with the car. Whereas I got into this car, and like I didn't purchase an NSX back in 2007 when I got my S2000 because the NSX was old. Fast forward to 2020, and I did purchase an NSX, and it's even older now. So at the time 2020, 2021, 2022, I was not in a great place with this car. I was kind of again, almost regretting purchasing it. But fast forward to 23, when everything came in, I got the transmission work done, I got the ABS done, I got all the oil leaks fixed. There's essentially no real heavy issues with the car. I'm kind of, you know, fell back in love with the car. So, you know, what's not to love about the car? It's a Honda's Halo car. But you know, I like to be real with all of you, real with anyone I talk to. You know, and that's when it goes back to my build philosophy, right? I had to go through all those hardships of maintaining the car and fixing it up to the spec, the level that I expect and I want the car to be. before I can really enjoy the car. So my ownership review in 2023, I really enjoyed the car. I'm really happy with what I've accomplished with the car. Although it might not look on the outside like I've done much compared to the pictures I showed you earlier when I first got the car on the BBS wheels, it might just look like I changed the wheels, got some red seats, you know? But on the underpinnings of the car, you know, I've done so much maintenance, wheel bearings, ball joints, bushings, oil pan, gaskets, I did transmission work, ABS work, you know, I did the cup kits, I did the exhaust system, the brakes, the wheels, the seats, the steering wheel, floor mats and all that, you know, some shifter, shift knob, shifter, short shift kit. There's so much that you can't see that culminate into this car right here that I'm very proud to have built, you know. So it's all good right now. I'm super happy with the car. I just can't wait to get out and drive it now. So again, in 2023, is this car worth it? I think it is. You know, cars like this, the S2000, all the 90s golden era Hondas, and even, you know, other cars of that generation, you know, whether the European or whatever, are appreciating in value or staying up in value because the electric car onslaught is among us, right? Everyone knows that these cars, these ICE vehicles, are no longer, the days are limited, right? Especially cars like this, you're not going to see anything like this anymore. So I'm really happy to own it. I'm happy to hold on to it. Sure, it's not the fastest, you know, probably every electric car, you know, people have joked for many years like a V6 Camry or something is faster than this car. Well, now that electric cars are here, almost every electric car is way faster than this, right? We also have a Model Y, which is way faster than this, but it's a completely different driving experience. So am I happy to have this car? Most definitely. It may not be the fastest, it may not have the most technology, it may not be the plushest or more comfiest ride, it's not the most fuel efficient, but it definitely makes you appreciate where it came from and what it is, right? The sounds it makes, the smells, the looks that you get while driving it. The overall experience you have driving this car is just kind of very unique, right? You can only get that with a very special car like this. So thanks for joining me on this 3-year ownership review. I hope you enjoyed this video. This video ended up having a happy ending, whereas my 1-year and 2-year review video may not have turned out to be so happy. So I'm super thankful for everyone family and friends who have supported me throughout the last 3 years. Whether you're helping get me parts, helping answer questions, helping me learn about the NSX, or family members that are helping me to have the time to work on this car, helping me to have the time to grow my Instagram and YouTube channel. I really couldn't have done it without any of you. So look out for more videos in the future. I will continue to produce DIY videos. I'm going to start doing driving videos, like I said, and then I'll try to get out to more meets and cars and coffees and things like that, and bring you more NSX and Honda content. So until then, thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.